somewhat surprised me, but on the other hand, perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised, given the growing, some of it is tension, some of it is pressure, some of it I think is simply a saliency of the issue that we're actually looking at. I'm not a demographer or a migration specialist, but I've talked to enough in my time to be able to say that actually movement of people has been a part of history since time immemorial. There's a Polish demographer friend of mine, who were colleagues a long time ago in London, who said Marx was quite wrong in seeing the history of the world as a history of class struggle. It's actually a history of the movement of peoples. We could certainly argue even about that. What I take from the present situation is that the free movement of labour, which came in with membership of the European Union, for the countries which we still call new member states, which I will use the word new in quotation marks. It seems to me that it's fascinating that nearly a decade on, they're still new. As one of my parliamentary colleagues said, a pair of shoes is not new after 10 years. The country clearly is. So the question is, how long are there going to be new member states? And, oh, I suspect for many years yet. So let's enjoy our novelty while we may. But what has clearly happened, which I think nobody quite expected, certainly I don't remember this being debated in any depth at the time when these countries were joining, that there would be migration, considerable migration, to those countries which are ready to receive them. Now, you may remember that in 2004, the new member states notionally had a 7-year period before the free movement of labour would apply, but the United Kingdom, Ireland and Sweden opened their markets immediately, opened the countries immediately. Labour movement, Germany and Austria waited the full 7 years. Those are the two ends of the spectrum. Now, when you read this article, you will see is that the British Prime Minister is talking about, I can't quote him precisely, either the biggest or one of the biggest migratory movements in history. Well, I wonder about that, but then he's the Prime Minister, not a historian. I have a shrewd suspicion that the migratory movement between 1945 and 48, which includes me, was actually bigger, but okay, let's not fault him for his history. Let's look at it actually, what is really happening. I mean, what I think has happened is that there's no question in the United Kingdom, very large number of people from what I'm still going to call the new member states have gone there to work. Why? This has caused tension now and indeed surprise. This actually is the surprise that surprises me. I still lived in London at that time, and I think I can safely tell you that every second coffee bar in London had Polish waitresses. And there certainly wasn't a building site in London where the Polish was not being spoken. And not just Polish and other languages, which a lot of South Slavs of refugees from the wars of Yugoslav succession. In a sense, Britain has always been open to refugees and migrants of one kind or another. Indeed, some would argue that all the Brits are the descendants of migrants, unless somebody wants to suppose define themselves as being descended from the Picts, which would make them Scottish anyway. Let's say that in that sense, pretty much everybody in Europe is in some way the descendants of migrants, but I think we can reasonably say that there are large parts of the population which have lived in the UK for many years. But I think what struck me was this statement of 1 million people from new member states in the UK, and that this is causing stress and tension, which is unspecified in the article, and in consequence of that, Britain was seriously thinking of introducing certain restrictions on the rights of European citizens, especially so-called welfare tourism, of people going to Britain simply for the purpose of getting various provisions, which, by the way, are fairly generous in the United Kingdom. Let me add that there is enormous migratory pressure on the United Kingdom. 2/3 of it is not from Europe. 2/3 of it is from outside Europe. Pretty much every country in the world has people, and I can't cite you figures, but I believe that probably about 200,000 to 300,000 Kurds are refugees in Britain. I certainly know that there are about 300,000 Russians, mostly in London, but not just in London. London is the 5th largest French town, or something along these lines. I mean, and there's a large number of Germans, I think also a considerable number from all the other EU 15. I've no idea. I know there's also migratory pressure just in the last 2 or 3 years from Spain and Portugal. So this is a Europe-wide phenomenon. There's also a global phenomenon. You can say, I think, readily that this is one of the consequences of globalization. But by the same token, there are at least 1 million British citizens living in other EU member states. So it isn't a one-way flow, it's a two-way flow. And then you get into the argument, has this migration been beneficial to the United Kingdom economically? Has it not been beneficial? Are the jobs that people are doing in Britain jobs that otherwise would not be done because the native Brits don't do these jobs of this kind? I can tell you that this brief visit that I paid to London last week, I had dinner in a restaurant in central London. One of the waiters was Hungarian, and then the following day, the person who handled my ticket for Eurostar was also Hungarian. So it seems to me the old story that Hungarians are everywhere is coming true. The particular fear that seems to be coming out of, especially some of the popular press in Britain, is the coming of Romanians and Bulgarians. From the 1st of January, the 7 years are up. They will be able to come, or not as the case may be, and I think this is what the debate is about. Let me add that the United Kingdom is not on its own. Parallel disquiet, perhaps, is the best word we're seeing. France, very specific cases, the Netherlands, Germany. I haven't heard anything from Belgium, but then I don't follow the Belgian press that closely. Some of you may already know the answer to that. Of course, economically, I think the argument is fairly clear that migrants do contribute positively to a particular economy. The cultural problem, I think, is the difficult one. How well do migrants integrate? Are they going to stay? We know that, for example, by now, more Poles are leaving the United Kingdom than are coming. But that still means probably several 100,000, maybe as many as 500,000 Poles are going to stay in the long term. How long that is, well, nobody knows. I did read this statistic maybe a couple of years ago, that the largest group of Poles going to the United Kingdom are women over 60. In other words, the grandmothers who are coming to look after the children. Now that does suggest a certain permanence in a sociological sense. The question that I want to raise next is that you all know this, that there are 4 freedoms which are at the heart of the single market: freedom of labor movement, freedom of goods, freedom of capital, freedom of services. Now, in my reading, these 4 freedoms are interdependent. And if one is restricted, for whatever reason, economic, non-economic, then that seems to me to give free hands to countries which may feel they want to restrict one of the others. At that point, we're looking at a fairly radical reconfiguration of the single market. Let me add that the countries which are involved in this are, on the whole, supportive of the single market. Britain certainly. I think the same is true of the Netherlands. France, I think, is less clear. If you're an economist, then you can say that this migratory movement is an aspect of efficient resource allocation. If you look at it, there is a shortage of semi-skilled and unskilled labor in the UK or any of these other countries, the Netherlands certainly, in France, where there is a supply of the same in the EU 13. So what we're simply seeing is the economic processes of the single market are saying, yes, you've got lots of people who you're not really employing at the same level, therefore they go to Britain and so on. There is a subsidiary issue here, which is, what I find is that many of the people, not by any manner of means all, who do go from Central Europe to the EU 15, actually have higher qualifications than the work that they're doing. You know, you have people working as waitresses with degrees in something really important like media studies. I'm only being mildly ironical. But I think it's fair to say that from this perspective, from this purely economic perspective, the single market is working efficiently. So people should be pleased. But of course, in spite of what everybody says, the world isn't just about economics. I would add that the remittances of the people who've moved to all these various countries, including the United Kingdom, are part of the GDP of the EU 13. I don't have a figure for the remittances, but I have a feeling that actually many families in many of these countries would do very badly if those remittances stopped. In other words, if there was a stoppage, a complete stoppage, and in some pressure for these migrants to go home. We're not there yet. All we're seeing at the moment is actually no more than threats, but the pressure from below, I think, is something else again. What I would finally say is that there are always unintended consequences of action. And it seems to me that the unintended consequences of free movement of labour are cultural, sociological, and political. They've been made political because they've become part of the debate on British membership in the United Kingdom. In a somewhat more subdued way in the Netherlands, in another way entirely, I think, in France. And I haven't followed the German debate, but I think it's also present there as well. Although actually my understanding is that the largest group of migrants in Germany are actually Turks, who we know are not members of the European Union. And there are other dimensions of this, which is that the rules of the single market are not a menu. You can't pick and choose, at least that's my reading of it. Legally, we're in a thicket. It's very difficult to work out what the legal regulations are, to what extent a country is free to deviate from the legal norms. I leave that particular point to the lawyers. But what I would add here is this very clear-cut political dimension that the labour market debate has received in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. I'm referring clearly to UKIP, I'm referring to Geert Wilders, I'm referring to the National Front in France, Marine Le Pen, and no doubt others whom we describe as populists, for whom the migration issue is a key one, rightly or wrongly. And then the question is, will any of the countries which are labour-rich and capital-poor start to think seriously about restricting other dimensions of the single market? That is the question which, in my mind, I think that if it becomes a political issue, of political ping-pong, retaliation, everybody's going to do badly. I also recognize that there are genuine fears of being swamped in some parts of the world. I think I'm right that London now has a non-white majority.